So, first off, I want to wish deeply happy Mother's Day to my wife and sister. Incredible gratitude for making me a dad and granddad, and an uncle and a great uncle, and for all they do for our family. And secondly, profound thanks to the Bergen Society, because you nurtured our family through the 80s, gave me the inspiration to become, and then Joe mentored me into ethical leadership, and you have given incredible uh, focus and leadership to the struggle for justice and peace throughout. As we do in Riverdale every month, or a week really, we acknowledge that we now occupy our brother sister Lenape's land, cruelly stolen, and we take this as an instigation to join with any and all, particularly indigenous leaders, in the struggle for justice and reconciliation among all. We remember to celebrate Mother's Day as you have, and to do that in particular, to rededicate ourselves to the struggle for justice and peace. Mother's Day was founded by Anna Jarvis, organized the first one in 1908 in her hometown of Grafton, West Virginia. This was to a tribute to her mother, who had nursed both Civil War veterans from both sides. Uh, as an activist, Anna had worked for sanitation, universal health care, and also in memory of Julia Ward Howe's 1872 call for all women to struggle for disarmament, and specifically against the Indian Wars. Mother's Day had a profoundly radical background, as our pillar of the society in Essex, Betty Levin, stressed in one of her most memorable addresses. And it behooves us to remember those roots and to act on them. Uh, I dedicate today's talk both to our Bergen member and a dear comrade and friend, Leslie Berkowitz. We lost him 2 weeks ago, and one of the things I'm happiest about was to encourage his and Edna's joining the Bergen Society. And I also dedicate it to my mother, Sarah Johnson White, who both of them were nurturers and fighters for justice and peace. I'm especially eager to pursue this talk with extended discussion and possibly ethical action stream. Out of this talk, at least 10 discussion groups could be raised, but the one I most hope is to reflect on the this past Thursday's op-ed piece, Biden's Taiwan policy is reckless, because I think the issue of war emerging, both locally and globally, is one of profound concern for everyone on earth. And I'm very eager for everyone to read and reflect and discuss this article and its implications. Uh, so the title comes from Joe Schumann's and my ruminations on the implications of Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and how they focus the issue of socialism repeatedly over the last few years. In a polarized country, it's been used to bait Democratic politicians, who, of course, are anything but socialist. But it has raised issues of how that group of activists, progenitors, have pushed the Biden administration toward the most progressive Democratic agenda in decades. Who would have thought that would happen? Actually, I was raised in the tradition of Franklin Roosevelt. My mother and grandmother's family were ardent Roosevelt organizers in Virginia, which was actually a fairly dangerous thing to do in the 30s. And we since learned that the role of the old Communist Party and the Socialist Party and the left played a similar role to the DSA for FDR. They and the CIO organizing made possible the very progressive gains that we made as part of the New Deal because of the energy they brought to the lobbying and the strikes and demonstrations of the 30s. But I think it is vital for us to look very carefully at what Bernie and AOC uh, actually stood for, and what would happen if they and our factions gained hold of the reins of power. I have to say that our Bronx Coalition for Justice has worked very productively in and with DSA for for 4 years around a number of vital issues, particularly racist police brutality, police in the schools, uh, trying to get cops removed as first responders for people in mental crisis. And we've come to know and work with DSA members now at some depth and with great respect. But I think it's very important to look at what the DSA and Bernie and AOC actually are saying and realistically look to see what would they be able to do if they achieve the reins of power. Would they be able to achieve full employment at a truly living wage, not the 15 an hour, because in many areas like New York, that is not a living wage? Would a capitalist economy be able and willing to accommodate that, whatever pressure that was brought to bear? Would they be able to acquire adequate housing, excellent health care for absolutely everyone? Would they be able to organize full protection from climate disaster, not just in the US, but globally? Would they be able to provide dignity and support for all immigrants who wanted help and comradeship here in the US? Would they be able to organize an end to racist police terror and white supremacist threats? And most importantly, vis-a-vis the article I'm hoping we can all focus on over several weeks, would they be able to avoid lethal conflict with China and horribly subsequent World War III? So we have to look at articles like the ones called "Is Bernie Sanders Truly the Anti-War Candidate?" by Richard Stocking, March 10th of 2020. And I would happily provide cites for all of the articles I'm citing when we connect. Uh, I don't think so. Sanders has had an uneven background in terms of war and military funding. And most recently, he has expressed ardent support for President Biden's confrontation with Taiwan and a willingness to defend Taiwan, which, as this article points out, could end disastrously. Why is this true? I will be radical and say they can't do this because, sadly, America is an oligarchy, not a democracy. Its rapacious rulers, representing multinational corporate interests, have the means at any time to boonswaggle masses of people, manipulate them, and dominate the structures of state power for their own ends. Therefore, I think in movement work, it is essential, whatever we see as our strategic goals, to focus sharply on the broader strategic issues facing humankind. I don't think any bourgeois politician can offer conclusive solutions to these deadly dilemmas. Each week, I make myself, it is very grim making, check the doomsday clock. I hope a number of you are familiar with the doomsday clock. Most recently, the concerned scientists have estimated that we are now within 30 seconds of destroying the planet as, as possible for human habitation. And I ask, can global capitalism cope with unfolding horrors? With climate disaster, I urge most especially that you read my friend Joel Covell's book, Enemy of Nature. This is the most comprehensive analysis of where global market capitalism has brought disaster to our planet, and some effort toward mitigating this and restructuring the global economy in a localized way that can help us survive and bring the planet back to safe. Sadly, we lost Joel 4 years ago, and it is a great joy to me that I was able to become his friend in his last years. The second question is World War. It's not something we want to think about. I think the anti-war movement was really uh, stripped by the Obama uh, election. It had its peak in 2003 when millions upon millions of us from January to March mobilized against the invasion of Iraq. We know how that turned out. But wasn't it incredible that we felt that solidarity around the globe with so many, many dedicated peace activists and parenthetically froze our backsides off in Washington? We sacrificed. There's three papers, articles I would recommend in this regard. I've mentioned the Peter Beinart op-ed piece, which I'm hoping we can discuss because it's the most immediate one and it focuses on Biden's approach to Taiwan, which could be disastrous. I also cite my best, most prescient professor, Graham Allison, as he has analyzed the likelihood of coming war with China with chilling results. And most especially, I urge people to read Paul Kennedy, a British uh, political scientist, professor at Yale, who, gosh, I think it was 15 years ago, wrote The Rise and Fall of the Great Powers, an incredible analysis of 500 years of empire conflict, proving, I think, that whenever one power challenged another to become hegemonic over the earth, it resulted in incredibly bloody conflict. It is not comforting, but it is analytically essential. Well, if we deem corporate capitalism the cause of climate disaster, racial and sexual oppression, and imperialist war, and that's certainly debatable and something for us to discuss. But if we do, then I think only envisioning global revolution can save us from grim destruction. But how can this happen? Uh, I'm actually not proud to say I'm descended from a Revolutionary War soldier. He was buried in the grave in Charlottesville, Virginia. But I'm not a member of the Sons of the Revolution. We used to go to his grave for 4th of July ceremonies. We don't do that anymore. But we have seen in the last years millions upon millions globally in motion, in outrage against racist police terror. Noam Chomsky points out that protests unleashed by the murder of George Floyd have exceeded all such movements in US history. Hordes of others worldwide were organizing and struggling against all of the outrage suffered by many billions of people. But those who make hands-on things and run the world for society, and the ones who generate profit, those working people are the ones who actually hold the decisive power. And in fact, in 2018 and 19, the largest surge in strikes in 35 years occurred. And last December, in India, workers launched the largest general strike in history, 250 million people. I have a cousin from India, and it is very helpful to parse with Shomi what this means, both for his family and homeland and for us worldwide. In other words, the potential for mass progressive struggle is definitely there. We also saw the potential for mass fascist struggle on January 6th. I comfort myself by saying there are more of them than there are of us. Small comfort given the conflict that will ensue, but it portends a very positive result. Tragically, though, history shows that the immense destruction and dislocation of World War is a necessary condition to make transformative revolution possible, as in 1917 and 1949, and expanding cohesive global leadership is also centrally important to success. And I'm happy to say that the modest movement I've been a part of for 50 years now has people active in 27 different countries worldwide, including India and Pakistan. What can we expect? The first such uprising that gives a clear notion of what can and must happen burst forth 150 years ago with the Paris Commune. Torn asunder by the Franco-Prussian War, the common people of Paris rose up in March of 1871 and expelled the masons of capital who had fomented the war and their protectors from the city. Together until mid-May, Paris experienced egalitarian direct democracy. All residents were involved on a daily basis in deciding how to meet the needs of ordinary people. This was difficult, given the limited resources, but successful. However, the communards failed to reckon what opponents would emerge. And in mid-May, the forces of capital broke the doors of the Paris walls, streamed through, and slaughtered thousands of communards in order to gain power. The great international song, The International, was written to commemorate this incredible victory by example. I think we would largely agree that the revolutions that fought to build socialism over a third of the world ultimately came to horrific ends. The honest left has struggled to understand this grim process for decades. The segment I've worked in for 50 years, by 1982, has come to what I think is something of incredible understanding. By keeping the linchpin of capitalist exploitation, the Chinese and Soviets maintained the structure of commodity production for profit, organized by the wage system of stratified payment. Sooner than later, the governing comrades themselves became oppressive ruling classes, restoring the familiar forms of divide and conquer exploitation that had grown over centuries of capitalist development. The saving necessity we resolved was to win our families, friends, and billions worldwide to fight for communal egalitarian systems where people would be one to strive to the fullest of their growing commitment and to participate in sharing the goods of our work, each according to need, not according to work done, not according to status. And we resolved to live into that process in our lives before a revolution. So this is all well and good strategically, but what do we do now? Revolution is clearly not around the corner. I think we dig in and struggle around every sick manifestation of racism, sexism, and imperialism the world so horribly coughs up. Especially, we must work around the clock to rebuild the global anti-war movement and pass the February 15th, 2003, 36 million that we saw in that decade. Bergen society has given great leadership in the struggle. For decades, you have championed refugees and provided sanctuary to those escaping the horrors of their home countries. You have fought the dangers of oil sands bomb trains chugging through our county. And you have led the movement to divest from fossil fuels. Our North Bronx Coalition Against Racism has mobilized continually against the racist police killings and brutalities and to stop the anti-Semitic attacks on Riverdale synagogues. Our Bronx Climate Justice North, together with indigenous leadership, organized the first New York City action in support of the Standing Rock resistance. Our congregations for justice and peace, based in Harlem, for 20 years has recruited many scores to oppose racist testing of young Black men and to stop gentrification of Southwest Harlem and to fight for mental health workers to be the first responders for people in mental crisis. And in each of these, and in many other struggles, we meet scores and scores of caring, creative people. We engage them in friendship building and long-term envisioning of how to build better the movement that can save and rebuild our precious earth and its people. This is how our understanding and commitment grow and develop, and how the forces of change grow. Finally, friends, I think we must ask what fundamental values we want to lead the development of our future global society. Let's simply face up to the deficiency of centuries of, quote, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness as horribly empty promises for us and too many of our brothers and sisters, like Breonna Taylor, like George Floyd, like Trayvon Martin. It's not for nothing that this national slogan was penned by a leading Virginian slave owner. Rather, I choose to follow the banner that proclaims both the process and the end result of ethical world revolution. A society where each of us is challenged to contribute to the good of all and to the fullest of their commitment, and each receives according to their need. I think Marx and Engels got it right when Jefferson did not. Thank you. I look forward to discussion.
Thank you, Jim, for that very provocative and timely talk. We have time now for questions. And please ask a question rather than making a statement, and limit your question to under 1 minute. If you prefer to put your question in the chat window, you can do that. At this point, I will turn this over to our Zoom master, who will manage the question and answer session.
Okay, thank you, Janet. So if anyone has a question, please raise your hand. And of course, when I say raise your hand, I mean raise it in Zoom. If you raise your hand physically, I probably won't see it. Do we have any questions?
Oh, please. I
Well,
thought
this seems to be a first, Jim.
Oh no.
Maybe, maybe you stunned people into silence.
No, come on, we're
okay, Jim Norman.
Oh, good.
Go ahead, please, Jim. Unmute yourself.
I am unmuted.
Okay. No, Jim Norman. Sorry.
First of all, I think the silence comes from the admonition that we're not to make comments, but only ask questions. I think some of the best questions come from comments, and some of the best discussion does. So I don't have a question. And if I'm not allowed to comment, then I guess I'm just going to mute myself again.
Well, let me clarify. So what we're trying to avoid is people to make their own speech. So certainly make comments, but we have a speaker. We don't want everyone else to try and be the speaker. That was the point of that. But go ahead with your comment, Jim.
Okay, I thought it was a very compelling and very thought-provoking presentation, and thank you, Jim, for it. And boy, I find myself in complete agreement with your eloquent statements of where you come from on many positions. But I just want to comment that many good values come from very flawed messengers, but as flawed as those messengers are, or can be, they're not nearly as flawed as the messengers that bring us the values that want to destroy us. And I think that we shouldn't really be so afraid of those flawed messengers that bring us good values along with things that we need to struggle against. I think that if we give up or set aside because we're afraid of a counter reaction, if we give up on some of the messages that they're bringing us, then we give up the biggest bargaining chip we have in the continual negotiation with those who would impose the status quo and even worse. That's my comment.
I greatly appreciate your comment, and I agree with you as one of many flawed messengers that I value flawed messengers. We are all imperfect for sure. And every movement has had its failures as well as strengths. What I'm trying to do is to look at the big and really scary global picture of world war and climate disaster and figure out what we can do now to raise that as the context in which we're all trying to work, and to dialogue with the people who work with us on particular localized shorter term goals to figure out how we can build a movement globally that can survive and prevail, in William Faulkner's words, against what's coming. Faulkner was a flawed messenger too, by the way.
Mark Hecht, please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Right.
Thank you.
Oh,
Yeah,
which
thank-
Mark?
Mark Hecht,
Yeah,
you're
hello?
next. Mark Friedman, you're next. Mark Friedman, but Mark Hecht, go ahead.
Okay, so yeah, thank you very much for the context and your views. I just wanted to. This is my question. So it seems to me, if you're familiar with political history and the great questions of governance, the Platonic and the Aristotelian, and moving, in the whole dialectic of politics, it seems that there's always going to be. One second, sorry, there's a little bit background noise. Yeah, there's this tension between, I think, like Plato once said, you can know a society is corrupt when the vested interests trump the public interest. But the thing is, there's also this concept that the masses are not truly capable of governance, because you need to have an intellectual elite. You need to have governance is really based upon using reasoning, and the people who have the best ability to make critical and have deliberative thought should have more power. The thing is, we have these different elites, so an intellectual elite, political, financial elites. So my question is, what do you think? The idea that there's always going to be this vanguard. It's going to either be an intellectual elite or a vested interest elite that are making the decisions. So you're suggesting that the intellectuals should be able to have more power in the society rather than the business class, because I don't see how the masses are capable of making rational decisions, and I don't think the vested interests like political and financial elites make rational decisions. The only people that might be capable of thinking in a disinterested way, I was wondering. I mean, my thoughts are that it would be academics and people who are that's their life, is to think rationally and to strive for truth. So do you think that those people should have more power in the society, and that would be the means to this kind of a more fair society, seeing that we can't really
Okay,
expect
let's let the speaker answer. Go ahead, Jim.
Excellent question, Mark. 1,000 thanks. Do we have an hour? Alas, we don't. But I would suggest that this could be an awfully good spin-off for an evening or two, sponsored by the society and with some planning. The short answer is clearly there has to be leadership that studies and shapes power and doctrine and strategy given understanding of society. Marx and Engels were, not working people. I have to say the political leader who shaped me most was a guy who never went beyond high school. He joined World War II by lying about his age, and then was radicalized in the context of being shot at on the top of a hill in Italy, and then became a labor organizer in steel mills and studied in order to help shape a new movement that would not make the same tragic mistakes that the Soviets and the Chinese made. And this was a guy with no advanced degrees at all, but very, very sharp and dedicated to using his brain and the collective brain of those people he was working with to shape a new direction for a movement. So that's my brief response, but would love to continue this.
Mark Friedman, please unmute yourself and go ahead.
Thank you, Jim. my question is going to oversimplify a dichotomy, but I'm going to do it anyhow and take a risk. To address these problems that you identified, and I agree with you in identifying them, would you say we need a larger government, more government, or less government? If those were the choices, what is the most effective way to be able to attack these problems you're talking about? More government action, less government action.
So the brief response is obviously to, my Zoom just went off. Can I be heard?
Yes,
Oh,
you can be heard.
Oh, good. I can't see anything, but what the heck. Clearly, for the agonies that people in the US and worldwide face at this point, larger government is absolutely necessary to mobilize a response. And, you know, driven by the left, the Biden presidency is trying to do that and succeeding in some measure, except for the wretched conditions of immigrants at the border. That remains an abomination that has got to be tended to. But in terms of strategic global governments, I think what is needed is a qualitatively different government that is totally responsive to working poor people's base and mobilizes in order to be responsive to those needs and to involve people from the base in carrying them out week by week. This is the Paris Communes model, and I think that's what we have to fight to institute globally.
Okay, Dan or Elaine, please unmute yourself and go ahead.
Hi, Jim. Thanks for the really great thought-provoking talk. Here's a question that comes up, especially in light of your, I think, absolutely right point about the need to refocus our energies on the global struggle against war. One of the issues that the world faces is that there are innumerable situations, well, maybe not innumerable, but a lot, where countries that are outside of, or somewhat outside of, the main capitalist orbit are themselves engaged in severe repression of ethnic and religious minorities. So even in the case of China, of course, the situation of the Uyghurs has gotten a lot of play in the bourgeois press. But even if you look at Taiwan, not the KMT, but the native Taiwanese have been severely oppressed by the KMT, by the way. And it's not clear that the Great Han nationalism of the present government of the People's Republic would be any better as far as its treatment of the Taiwanese. Similarly, one can think of the Kurds and any number of others. And sometimes one gets in this bizarre situation where, presumably for purely selfish reasons, some of the worst bourgeois countries will wind up, at least temporarily, defending some of those minorities, or at least doing better than other countries are, which creates some difficult situations if one is concerned about both human rights and peace at the same time. I wonder if you have any thoughts about how, in general, one can approach those kinds of issues, not selling the oppressed minorities down the river when one is actively seeking global peace, but on the other hand, not giving up on global peace and supporting countries that may temporarily support those oppressed minorities. I think these are hard questions. I wonder what your thoughts are about them.
A very, very useful and complex question, and would love for us to pursue this again in 2 or 3 evenings of Zoom study. I mean, clearly, World War II was an example of my wife's Jewish family, all of our families in Europe, being oppressed to genocide, and the Allies, particularly the Soviets and the US, led by the Soviets, involved in all-out war to smash the Nazi oppressors and liberate as many of those minorities as possible. Tragically, not enough of them. That said, since World War II, I'm trying to think of instances when the US or others who frankly are imperialist countries have intervened ostensibly to help minorities and have in fact been helpful in that case. There may be some. I'm eager to find that out. But it seems to me that the main guiding principle is the Marxist understanding that an injury to one is an injury to all, and support for grassroots organizing on the ground, oppressed people in China, along with the minorities in the Northwest, Rohingya in Malaysia, the native Taiwanese, all are oppressed, and there are segments within the majority culture who are oppressed at some level too. And the idea is to support joining to overthrow the oppressors in the interest of everyone in that space. How to accomplish that, I'm not sure. But, we've been involved in grassroots efforts to support in the past, and will continue to do that. And a global revolutionary movement will be built on that maxim that an injury to one is an injury to all. But that's just the beginning of a position I would love for us to explore at some length over the coming weeks.
I have a question, but first, you asked for if you could anyone could think of an example of a effort where a country went to war genuinely to help an oppressed minority. I could think of the American and NATO efforts in Kosovo as maybe the only example. But I do have a question. You earlier in your talk mentioned the two largest countries to claim the communist mantle and how their regimes ended so catastrophically. So I wonder if you could comment on why you think that has happened to countries that have claimed the communist mantle, why they've ended up being among the worst regimes in the world.
Well, I'll expand a bit on what I outlined briefly in the talk. I would urge everyone to read a document called Road to Revolution 4, because, after decades of looking at this horrible, horrible phenomenon, the drafters and those of us who then began to critique it and understand it, localized on the effect that each of the communist regimes kept the living kernel of capitalism alive, which is exploitation of the masses of people in different ranks, creating a favored ruling class who was from the highest stratum, got the most benefits, and therefore turned into its own capitalist ruling class, and then proceeded to do precisely what all ruling classes do, racist and imperialist, and developed into full-blown capitalist societies. I haven't exhaustively looked at every example of that. I think it's an awfully good hypothesis to proceed on analyzing for that. And as I like to say to friends, that's one mistake we won't make. We'll make new and interesting mistakes. Help us.
Please, Mark Hecht, please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Yes. So I have two questions that are, I think,
okay, try and make them short, but go ahead.
Right. So, okay, one question is, for me, the whole issues that we're dealing about, and whether it's capitalism, communism, or any social economic structure, there's two fundamental questions. Or like, one is the question of how, which we need to answer. I think this is more important than the ideology. It's more just more based upon some fundamental principle. What's the relation? Should there be a relationship between personal responsibility and collective responsibility? And how does that relationship, what are the vicissitudes of that relationship? How should they unfold? And what would be the ethical and moral criteria that would inform that relationship, and also the practical criteria? Because I think that's the question that's really important, regardless of the brand of economics or whatever. You need, I think the idea of according to need and according to, I think there has to be something that's more a lucid way to create a structure that's based upon this relation between personal and collective responsibility. And there's one more question, the question about how does one decide what a public good or a private good should be? And obviously it should have a socio-historical context. And what do you think the criteria should be? And how does one develop the criteria to decide what should be made into a public good or be kept as a private good? So those two fundamental questions, I think if we could answer those, we'd have a pretty good template on how to structure any social economic system.
Those are complex and brilliant questions. I'm going to approach the first. I'm not sure I can tackle the second in the time we have. But ethical culture leader that I am, I go back to founder Felix Adler. And I think Adler, in a lot of ways, was a religious genius as well as a socio-political genius in striking the balance between the individual and the social. He saw that one could not develop without the other, that individual growth and responsibility was nurtured in the context of the larger communal experience, the collective, if you will, and you could not see it developing apart from that. And so personal responsibility is part of what's nurtured in a growing family, community, social structure that calls forth that as part of development and ethical growth. I'm not sure that I can approach the public versus private good, except by the same framework. Clearly, what we're fighting for is a society where the fullest development of each person's individual powers is totally promoted. And as Adler says, they're going to be different and complementary to others, and that each individual is a part of a whole and an indispensable part of such a whole. So in that sense, there is no fundamental difference between public and private good, because each develops the other and each facilitates the other, ideally.
Yeah, I see no more hands raised, so I will turn it back to Janet.
Well, I'm going to go off script a little bit and read a quote, because I just find it so resonates with our talk this morning. Do not be daunted by the enormity of the world's grief. Do justly now. Love mercy now. Walk humbly now. You are not obligated to complete the work, but neither are you free to abandon it. I feel that reflects very much the spirit of our talk today. And in order to get more information about us, David will present a short video.
Thank you, Janet. To learn more about us, visit our website, ethicalfocus.org, or email us at admin@ethicalfocus.org, and we'll get back to you. To make a donation, go to ethicalfocus.org/donate. Please follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, and you can watch many of our past programs on our YouTube channel.